The state of the Catholic Church today, and specifically the state of the priesthood, that's our topic on Personally Speaking. Two young men from Fordham have put together a film called Discerning the Call about why someone would become a priest and what's the state of the priesthood today. Please stay with us. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Monsignor Lisante, and Jay Doherty and Patrick Cullinan join me now. They are Duffy Fellows at Fordham University. Jay and Patrick examine the cultural changes that have affected the American Catholic priesthood in the past 75 years in their new documentary called Discerning the Call, Change in the American Priesthood. Jay Doherty is a sophomore at Fordham University studying journalism and philosophy. Patrick Cullinan is a senior at Fordham University, graduating with a major in Latin and minor in economics. They're here with us today to talk about how discerning a call to the priesthood is a much different process today than it was decades ago, and why there's a decline in vocations in the United States. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking, Duffy Fellows Jay Doherty and Patrick Cullinan. As I did in the introduction, I explained where Patrick and Jay are coming from in terms of their new film, but I'm always fascinated by where we come from to do the work that you do. So first things first, you guys have a close association with education at Fordham University. I want to know, Fordham University for you guys, was it a good decision and why?
I'll start. I think coming to Fordham was a great decision. I was confirmed here, and I really started entering into the life of the church at Fordham. So I've been immensely grateful for the campus ministry, the Jesuit presence on campus, which is really crucial and important, and the Catholic friends that I've made here.
Okay. Jay?
Certainly, yeah. No, coming to Fordham was probably one of the best decisions I've actually ever made. I also have been the Jesuit presence on campus has been terrific. This whole movie, this project would not have been possible without the support of Fordham. I've made many good Catholic friends as well as friends who and as well as friends who are priests and Jesuits in training and to be priests. And so I think we're uniquely privileged to have the opportunities that we have at Fordham, and it's just been from beginning to end a wonderful experience. So I have to say, and I'm only a sophomore, but I've certainly had a great experience so far.
We had Kyle MacArthur, a graduate of Regis High School, who talked about his education from the Jesuits as being something that taught him not what to think, but how to think, which is high praise indeed. And Patrick, when you say that you came to embrace more fully the faith, what had been your experience before that?
I was baptized Catholic, and my family was pretty much just lapsed Catholic.
Okay.
So I was going to an Episcopalian church for a little while, but I wanted to connect with my kind of ancestral roots. So I was happy to come to a Catholic school and to dive into the liturgy and the culture.
And what's the connection? We found you through David Gibson. How are you guys connected to David, the great Catholic writer and leader in so many ways?
Yeah, so David Gibson is the director of Fordham's Center on Religion and Culture, and he oversees, along with David Goodwin, the assistant director, the Duffy Fellowship program. And Patrick and I were privileged to serve as 2023-24 Duffy Fellows. And the Duffy Fellowship program is a program that Fordham offers where it's basically to 3 or 4 students every year, or grad students or recent graduates of Fordham, to produce some sort of project at the intersection of religion and culture. And David Gibson and David Goodwin are tremendous leaders of the Center on Religion and Culture at Fordham.
Now, as we talk about discerning the call, for our listeners and watchers around the world, right up front, how do they find out how and what's the best way to watch the film?
The best way to watch the film is actually now going to be at discerningthecall.com. The full version is not publicly released as we record. However, it will be very shortly. So discerningthecall.com is the best way to watch.
Okay. Having made this film about the priesthood of the past, the priesthood of the future, are you guys hopeful that the priesthood is going to stay around?
I'm certain it will stay around. That's more the purview of the Holy Spirit. And certainly I think the demographic shifts and statistics have been alarming to Catholics for the past 50 years, but we should not be hopeless about the situation.
Okay.
Things seem to have kind of leveled out. And the Catholic Church of the United States is growing in the South, even if it's struggling in other places, even still. And based upon our documentary, the young men we spoke with, I feel certainly hopeful about what the next 50 and 100 years have in store for the church in America.
You know, I'm around long enough that I was working on the campaign of Eugene McCarthy, who was running for president in 1968 as a teenage kid. And I remember that I thought that political activism was something I should bring with me into the priesthood. I wondered, as you talk to priests from that time, 1968 to now, 2024, what is your own view of how priests should or should not be approaching the social, political, moral issues of our time?
That's a really interesting question, and we did try to explore that. Actually, one of the most revealing parts of the documentary came probably in the later 75% marks or so in terms of length. And we did the Center, the Catholic Project and the Center on for Applied Research in the Apostolate did all sorts of studies about the involvement of political activism within preaching and within the priesthood in general. And what that we have seen over the since roughly the 50s and 60s to now the present day or so is a dramatic increase in priests who self-identify as politically or theologically conservative. So the orders, the priests that were entering much earlier were generally, or at least they were generally more liberal, I think one could say. And today they're not that way. And so one component that Patrick and I have tried to discern as we try to make this movie is how do we incorporate that into the film? We think there's been a lot, and that's also a unique component of the American experiment and the kind of what has happened in America, because that's not necessarily the case, or we didn't really cover what happened more broadly within the world. But certainly politics and the way that the America has evolved, it almost, you could look at this documentary as an American history documentary through the lens of the priesthood and not so much the other way around. So certainly politics was an enormous part of it.
For our
Although I'll
listeners,
say,
go ahead. Sure.
sorry,
No, go ahead,
I'll
please.
say, as for activism, I think what we found was that priests of the 60s and 70s or 50s and 60s were more politically active. Younger priests today are not as American, it seems, as they are Catholic, and so they've been, I think, in self-identity, they're kind of set apart from American culture. They certainly care about American politics, but it's not as much of a priority for them, based upon our interviews, as it was for priests in the middle of the 20th century.
I do something I think is a good idea, because I think our Catholic voters, I want them to know the issues and where people stand. So I regularly invite people who are running for office to the church. First, to go to Mass, not to have them speak at Mass, because I know that would be crossing the line, but they're always afterwards in the back of the church to just take people's questions and comments. What's troubling to me is that, for instance, our county executive was just over recently, and he said, this is the only Catholic church I've ever been invited into. I go to synagogues, I go to Protestant churches, Black Baptist churches, but I never get invited to the Catholic Church. You talked about the fact that we think of ourselves first as Catholics, second as Americans. Isn't it necessary, though, if we're going to put Catholic values into effect in the public square, that we engage people who are, in fact, politicians?
Certainly, it seems to me to be necessary, and I'm grateful that for the priests who are involved. But there's so much risk there of eventually placing your American identity before your Catholic identity, your American political values before your Catholic values. In fact, I think that quite a lot of the harm that the church has seen in the past century or so has been in the kind of assimilation of Catholics to the American political landscape. Today, the American Catholic laity is pretty much evenly split politically. That's, well, it's a good or bad thing depending on how you see it. But I think it does certainly say that Catholics are very American in this country. We've aligned ourselves to the American political extremes and spectrum. And I'd say that that's a shame, actually.
Your film is coming out at a time that is it's so topical. I'm thinking everybody today, as on the day we're filming this interview, is talking about Harrison Butker, the Super Bowl champion, and his points of view, not only on the church, but specifically on the role of the priest, and his idea that, we work too hard to be close to people, to be friends with people, to be relatable instead of being truth sayers for them, and being someone who teaches. I'm wondering, you guys have obviously spent time hearing people like Harrison speak. What do you make of that?
Sorry, could you repeat that question one more time?
Sure, sure. I'm asking if you guys have been familiar with Harrison Butker's speech at a college graduation where he challenged the church at many levels, but specifically priests, by saying that for a long time priests have tried to be relatable to people, a friend to people, close to people, instead of realizing that they are set apart and are supposed to be teachers and guiders and leaders for the people, not buddies. I wonder, because Harrison's commencement speech has certainly drawn lots of attention and some criticism, what your view of what he said is about the role of the priest.
That's a really interesting question. Thank you so much for clarifying. One of the questions that we actually asked to almost all of our interviewees is what is the priesthood? What does it mean to be a priest? And it sounds like a basic question, but it's actually, to some people, even devout Catholics, that might be a hard question to answer. I think it would be reductionist or overly simplistic to simply say that a priest says mass and they kind of vanish for the other times that you're not really seeing them in action or in ministry. And one of the most insightful answers I think we got from that question was from Father Eric Andrews, who is a priest and currently the pastor of St. Paul the Apostle Church in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
He said that at the heart of the priesthood is really praying with people. And I think that kind of merges the dichotomy that you just mentioned there, between trying to be friendly with people, but also trying to spread the gospel and preach and help people through different challenges in their lives. So he mentioned that priests are all, present at baptisms, in funerals, in mass, in more identifiably Catholic things like the rosary or adoration and those sorts of ceremonies and that sort of thing. So I think I would parrot, and I would parrot the wise words of Father Andrews when he says that the heart of the priesthood is praying with people. That was something that we found consistently across all of the interviews that we did.
For that same question, a seminarian answered us by saying that since we call priests father, we can't forget that one of a priest's main roles is father to a community.
Mm-hmm.
And that, relevant to this commencement speech, I think would inform the laity of what their relationship to the priest should be, and priests what their relationship to their family should be. A father can be very friendly with his children, but they're not peers strictly. So there's a delicate balance of relation and separation there.
Let's say I'm a normal searching young man thinking about the priesthood. What's the impact from the interviews you did for that young person thinking about priesthood when it comes to, I'm swimming toward a ship that is taking on water badly because of the sex scandals? You and I may know that it's only 4% of the priests who've ever done bad things to kids, but the truth is the other 96% of us are tarred by that brush. Why would anyone want to head into an institution that is so badly maligned right now because of mistakes of the past?
Bishop.
Go ahead, Patrick. Sorry.
Bishop Barron spoke to this in a lecture he did on the book of First Samuel, about how the priests in Jerusalem were betraying God at that time and committing actual abuses, sexual abuses. And at that same moment, God was calling Samuel. Bishop Barron said that when he would to speak to discerners, they would say that they wanted to be part of the solution, even at this time of great distress for the church. That's certainly what we found in our interviews of the young men we spoke to. They were certainly aware of this issue. I think it looms large in the imagination of a young man who becomes a priest, but not as a reason not to do it. In fact, in a way, as a reason to do it, so that they can help to repair the church and heal the church from the suffering it has undergone.
Let me use an example with you of maybe the emotional or social whipping of points of view in the life of the church. I want to know how you think it impacts on those who were in the priesthood. 30 years ago, I had written a column in the Catholic Press called Lacking Compassion. as a devout pro-lifer myself, I said, we got to stop picking on gay people, because the truth is, if we love life, we love all life. And the church has taken on this view. It makes us look biased and bigoted against people who are gay. I mention that to you because I said to Cardinal Supich recently, that article I wrote 30 years ago that was controversial now could have come out of the mouth of Pope Francis yesterday. And I'm not unhappy that what I said 30 years ago is coming out of the mouth of the Pope. But my point is that I've lived through Pope John Paul, I've lived through Pope Benedict, I've lived through Pope Francis, and the truth is, they present the truth in very different stylistic ways. What's your point of view in terms of that impact on a priest who's trying to be faithful to the magisterium, but at the same time is dealing with the colorful personalities that come and go in the way in which they present the truth?
What an interesting question. We interviewed. It was really fascinating. As I mentioned, we Fordham is a Jesuit school, and so we're uniquely privileged to have just about 100 Jesuits on or around campus. And so most of the people we interviewed were Jesuits, but we also interviewed priests from or seminarians really from St. Joseph's Seminary out in Dunwoody, and they are in formation become diocesan priests in New York. We found that there were different answers. Patrick noted that Patrick noted to me once that the only person who actually wore a cassock during our interview was one from the diocesan, who's a diocesan priest. And so that was kind of an interesting split there. We could notice very identifiably. But to answer your question, I think the most important one thing that actually a lecture that I watched very recently was from Cardinal Dolan of New York, who we did interview for this movie, and he gave a lecture on the past three popes from Pope John Paul to Benedict to now Francis, and he said he made the argument. I don't know if arguments is maybe too strong of a word, but he kind of simplified each of their papacies as leading one with the heart, one with the mind, and then now Francis with the soul. And saying that in leadership, one needs heart, mind, and soul, all three, to do anything well or to succeed in leadership. And I thought that was an interesting sort of breakdown of the last three popes, but also the Catholic argument for people in leadership positions, and something that I often think about. Of course, those values can be secularized quite easily, but within a priest, I think having a heart, mind, and a soul, and having that within a community is also something that's very crucial, because without one of them, the whole thing seems to fall apart.
Do we have another point of view there?
Oh, sure. Based upon the interviews we did, and my speaking with young Catholics and young seminarians, I'd say that Pope John Paul II seemed to have an incredibly important inspirational role in the discernment of seminarians and discerners of his time.
Mm-hmm.
Pope Francis has a very important role in the ideology and activism of young Catholics in our time. I'm not sure you could say, however, that he draws people as much to the priesthood, or that the people he is particularly inspiring to are the type of people who are drawn to become priests.
Yeah.
There's this kind of problem with what you might call progressive Catholicism, in that it doesn't produce as much priests in the modern day. That's why so many young priests are so conservative, because, well, perhaps simply because young progressives in Catholicism aren't so interested in celibacy, or that the priesthood is all male, and so they're not interested in becoming priests themselves.
It's interesting too that you say that, because I see a lot of people who would probably say he's the opposite of the introducer who brings people into the priesthood, and that he's challenging a lot of priests. So many of his talks are challenges in terms of clericalism, hiding behind the Catholic Church instead of engaging the world. So he's an interesting challenge. But let me ask you this: coupled with that has to be the question, which I know you got into in your film, the whole question of celibacy. Andrew Greeley, the wonderful priest sociologist, years ago said, why is it not possible that a man can give 25 years of his life to the priesthood and then return to the lay state? Why does he have to give his whole life? And he raised the related issue of the discipline of celibacy. From what you can see, if tomorrow Pope Francis changed the discipline and said we'll have both a celibate clergy and a married clergy. Would it enhance, enlargen the priesthood as we know it? What do you think, from what you talk to in terms of the people on your film, would be the impact?
A lot of people say and think that expanding the priesthood in that way would solve the vocations crisis. And several of the men we interviewed said so. Well, several of the Jesuits we interviewed said so. I'm not fully convinced by that because Protestant churches have married clergy, and they struggle with the exact same thing. In fact, the Anglican Church is, by many accounts, just fully dying at this point.
Mm.
Also, it would be sad to give up on a over 1,000-year-old tradition so easily simply because we are going through a difficult time. We've gone through difficult times before, and if we are to make a change like that, I would hope it would come from a theological reason and well thought out at that, rather than simply this idea of, oh, it's necessary, so we got to change the rules.
Patrick and Jay, a more personal question. There's the film in terms of what's going on in the priesthood today, who responds to the call, but I'm always intrigued by the people who make their film. So I've had over the years the film director Frank Capra and Ted Melfi, who did Hidden Figures, and we just did Matthew Brown, who did Freud's Last Session, John Avildsen, who did Rocky. All these interesting filmmakers, as you are now too. But I'm intrigued by where they're coming from. So I need to ask Patrick and Jay, what do you guys love about the church?
Well, there's a lot. I personally have found I was born Catholic. I've been raised Catholic. My parents are Irish, and my grandparents are also Irish, so it's kind of been handed down in a great tradition. And I found I went to a Catholic school for my elementary school. I did not go to an independent. Did not go to a Catholic school for my high school, but I did go to an independent school. And then I went to Fordham, which is a Catholic university. And honestly, that gap without the Catholicism at my high school and then coming back to it in college reignited in me something. And I think brought back a warmth to education and sincerity and a purpose, really a mission-driven purpose that was not so much there in my secular high school. And so that reinvigorated me into the church. I then kind of, my freshman year of college, studied and almost became obsessed, honestly, with Catholicism and how the church has grown over many centuries and that sort of thing. So it also turned into kind of a history project. Then I realized, in addition to all of this kind of distant historical work that I'm now taking in, there are so many priests and kind of the present day version of history around us on campus with all of these priests, which is unique, as I mentioned before. Okay. So I wanted to learn more about their vocations. And I know Patrick also has had a similar experience where he's also very interested in this. And so he also wanted to learn more. And then we found we have a similar interest. At the same time, this fellowship application was coming out, and so we kind of merged our personal interests into this project, and that's how it sort of came about. So I think there's a great deal of overlap, one could say, between our personal interests and how this film actually came about.
Patrick.
For me, I found that I love being a person of faith, and I love Jesus Christ, of course, particularly. Being a Catholic, therefore, and being a member of the church feels like a special privilege, because we not only get to participate in rituals and prayers of love and sacrifice to Jesus, but we get to be with him and see him in a mass daily or weekly. So it's perhaps it's very particular, but the Eucharist is one of the happiest things about being a Catholic to me.
In the interview we had done with the iconic film director Frank Capra, he talked about the fact that as an immigrant, he came to this church and came to this country and thought Catholics are immigrants and poor and they get nowhere, and I want to be successful. So he left and became Protestant for quite a while, and said that throughout his search, there was an emptiness, a hollowness in his heart, until his wife, who was a Lutheran but converted to Catholicism, said, "You will never be the man you're supposed to be until you go home and until you receive the Eucharist." And he said when he came back to the Catholic Mass and received the Eucharist, he found a richness, a fulfillment of his Holy Spirit that he had not known for all those years. He was, as he said, in the wilderness. I think you're touching on something so powerful, that there's a uniqueness to our sacramental life that is unknown elsewhere, and I'm so grateful for you guys for articulating that. In the remaining moments, I want people to see this film because I think you did a great job, and I'm hoping you guys continue to work in a creative way to produce the kind of work you did with this particular film. Where do we get it? Again, tell us, our listeners, our viewers, how do we watch this Discerning the Call film?
It's at discerningthecall.com. You should go to discerningthecall.com. The full movie will be right there, and anything else we do related to the film, we'll be sure to update that as well.
Okay. And who is the film for?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I would say it's for everyone because I think you can really, no matter what your background is, where you come from in the world, there's a lot to learn. And these are all very important issues. We thought for a long while that there are people of all different backgrounds within the country, within the world, who could certainly enjoy and learn a lot from this film. And certainly it would help, I would think, I would hope, someone who is discerning a call to the priesthood or to religious life as well in particular.
Patrick, anything to add?
Yes, yeah, that everyone should watch it. Certainly, everyone who knows a priest, but men in discernment will, I think, will benefit from hearing the story of discernment over the course of the last 75 years, and hearing the advice that these priests have to give, which is involved in the documentary as well.
I thank Jay and Patrick for being with us and for creating this film. As a priest for 43 years, I was intrigued by it, and it gave me an overview that I really needed to see in terms of where we've been, where we're going, and I love that it comes from two young men who have a deep and rich life in creative arts, as well as people who are believers. And I hope that you continue to produce abundantly because you guys have a great and wonderful talent. Thank you so much for being on Personally Speaking, and for all you give us through your film and through your personal witness. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Monsignor. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us on Personally Speaking. If you need to reach me, you can do that at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. You've been probably listening to this show on the Catholic channel at 129 on Sirius XM. We're also seen on YouTube. Search under Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. Our program's also on Facebook at Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante. We're also on Instagram at Personally Speaking Podcast. In addition to acting as host and executive producer, Personally Speaking, I'm also the pastor of Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Massapequa Park, New York, where we post daily Mass on YouTube. So please join us at Mass, as well as on our interview program, Personally Speaking. Please share and let others know about Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.